Hello everybody and welcome to this week's episode of Behind the Frame. As you've seen in previous weeks, myself and fellow guides will bring images from the field from all across the world, different destinations, and we will bring images that we really like, that have a bit of meaning to them. We'll edit them in Lightroom here. We'll talk you through the process of how we edit them, and also a little bit of the backstory behind the image. So today I wanted to share with all of you an image that I took in India 2022, so last year in April. It's of a spotted deer, and it's a very, very special photo to me, and I'll get into why it's so special to me. But I wanted to go through the post-processing of this image. There isn't a lot to do to it, but there's a few minor adjustments that I'd like to make to it. So I hope that you enjoy this edit, and I hope that you enjoy this episode. Okay, right, so getting into the edit of this image. The reason why I chose it is India is such a unique destination, and it's so different to any other safari that I've ever been on, in that you spend a lot of time in these national parks, driving back and forth between water sources. Being April, it is a very hot month in India, so the tigers, unlike most other cats, really enjoy the water. So we go from waterhole to waterhole, checking to see if there's any tigers around the waterhole. But along with that, we also use the general game around, such as spotted deer, langur monkeys, and a variety of other animals in the area. And what we generally do is we will drive a bit, check some water holes, and then we will stop and listen for alarm calls. And typically when you hear a spotted deer alarm calling, it gets really exciting, because you know that there's a predator in the area. So what I wanted to do was edit this image for all of you. I'll give you a look at it now. This is the image. It's two spotted deer. I've taken this image in landscape orientation. I am going to nitpick a little bit on this image, and the reason for it is I wanted to create enough space, but I think that the composition is a bit off. You know, I put the subject right in the center of the frame, and if you have a look at the image itself, you'll see, this is me nitpicking now, but these trees that leave the frame. So I always check the edges of the frame, make sure that there's nothing too distracting. There's something going on down here in the bottom right hand corner. There's another tree and another tree that leave the frame. Even though they're not in focus, I want to try and eliminate that as best as I can. So if we go into the editing side of things, what I might do is just try and change the composition completely from a landscape orientation into a portrait orientation. And as you've seen in previous episodes of mine, my process is to work through a crop. So let's look at a crop here first. How can I eliminate those trees that I find distracting? I mean, you can't always eliminate everything from it, but we can do the best that we can with what we have. So I'm going to jump straight into a crop, do a portrait orientation. I'm going to move this over slightly. And the reason why I'm going to go for this crop is, okay, I've now eliminated these trees that are leading out of the frame. I've got a small tree at the back. I'm not too concerned about that one. I've shifted the frame across slightly, and the reason being is, look at the posture of my subject. You can see the direction. It is facing more the left-hand side of the frame, although the animal is looking directly at me. And so is the spotted deer in the background. So what I want to try and do with this image is I'm going to crop it like that. And now I just want to try and maybe enhance it slightly, make it a little bit more vibrant. What I really like about this image is that you've got this 50-50 light on the subject's face. So my left-hand side has got light on it, whereas the right-hand side there's a lot of shadow. So we can create a lot of contrast and emphasize our subject in this image. And by doing that, I will typically once again start with whites and blacks, and just try and create a bit of contrast there. I don't like to use the contrast slider under the basics menu or the exposure here. I do play around with them time to time, but it's very, very seldom. So what I'm going to do here, you can also just see my depth of field while I've got this information up on the left hand side here. I was using a 200 to 400, shot at ISO 800, and my aperture is 7.1, which means that I've got quite a large depth of field running through the image. That's why you can see a lot of this foreground is in focus. But having said that, 7.1 is enough to blur out the second spotted deer in the background. And as you can see with my crop, I'm not clipping that animal either, because it does add to the image the symmetry of how they are standing. They're almost standing identical to one another, and I really, really like the posture of both these animals here. So as I mentioned, I'm going to go into the basic menu. I'm going to start with the whites, hold Option down. I'm going to drag it up. Remember, if we drag it too high, we start to wash out those white areas. So I'm going to bring it back. And a lot of this is just done by typical feel and look of the image. The blacks, let's see, I'm going to bring the blacks down slightly. But I want to create this contrast here. And it's going to sound silly, but I'm going to lift the shadows a little bit. And you'll see if I drag them from either side, look at the histogram at the top. You can see that shift to the left when I bring the shadow slider down. It's showing me these dark areas here. It's escalating the dark patches on their body, and that's what you're seeing in the histogram above. So I'm going to lift the shadows a little bit just to bring out a little bit of detail. But now this is where it gets a little bit confusing, because I'm lifting the shadows, but at the same time I want to keep that contrast. So I want to keep the darkest areas dark, but still preserve some detail in some of those dark areas by lifting the shadows. So let's go back to the image itself. I'm going to bring down the darks a little bit. Okay. Now we can already see before, after. So the before looks, it is a decent image, and the exposure is fairly nice. This is an edit that I'm going to just make minor adjustments here and there just to really make my subject pop, because remember, your eye is always drawn to the sharpest part of the image, the biggest part of the image, and the area with the most contrast. So I'm going to focus on trying to get my subject, which is this front spotted deer, just to pop a little bit more. And there is quite a bit for us to work on here if we really want to. I'm going to go into the tone curve. I'm really happy with the dark areas in this image, so I am going to just lift the highlights ever so slightly here, and the light. All right, and the reason why, okay, that's a bit drastic. The reason why I'm doing that is, if you have a look at this animal here, sorry, let me just get that up. If you have a look at the spotted deer, look at the face here. You can see 50-50 light on the face. This eye on the left-hand side is in shadow, whereas this eye, we've got this beautiful twinkle coming through, the sparkle, catch light. So what I do want to do is at some point get into the eyes and just make them pop a little bit more. But what I'm going to do is jump straight into the masking tool, one of my favorite tools to use. I'm going to select masking. Okay, so it's selecting both my subjects, my main subject obviously being the one that's sharp and in focus and in front, and it's also selecting the deer at the back. I'm not too worried about it selecting this grass here. What I'm going to do to add a little bit of contrast, normally what I like to do, it is a very sharp image as it is, but just increase sharpness slightly. All right, and then to add that contrast to the coat, I'm going to increase clarity as well. So it's small differences, but you can see this is nice and sharp. The clarity is beautiful. You can see the texture in the ear here. Look at the nose of the spotted deer here. Look at the detail that is there, that is preserved there. So I'm really happy with that. And while I'm zoomed in like this, I'm going to select the brush tool. I'm just going to have a look at the brush, working with it. I can bring it down a little bit. And normally, typically, I will work. Let me lift it a bit. Sorry. Normally, I will work on both eyes. But when you're working with an image like this that's got two very different contrasting eyes, it's actually best to work on them individually. So what I'm going to do here, just play around with it a little bit. It is quite dark, so let's lift shadows. It's going to be quite a drastic lift. You can see it actually starts to bring a little bit of detail out on the right hand side. I can lift exposure slightly. And we are also starting to get this sparkle coming through the eye here. So I'm going to just play with highlights ever so slightly. And then what I will do, because it's such a dark area, and because there could be a little bit of noise in there, it looks like there might be. It's something that I do with all my edits when I'm working on eyes of animals. I find, especially when animals are looking directly at us, that the eyes are absolutely key in an image. So what I've done here is I've just lifted the noise slightly, just to make it have that smooth feel, and I'm pretty happy with that eye the way that it is. The highlight of this image here is this eye on my left hand side, the deer's right hand side. So I'm going to select another brush because I want to work on them individually. Select the eye like this, and all I want to do is just minor adjustments to the eye to really get that catch light to pop out. I'm going to come and I'll lift shadow slightly just to get a bit of that brown color starting to come through at the bottom of the eye there. So you're starting to see a little bit of contrasting colors there. And then I'm going to lift the highlights to get that sparkle to really pop. And once again, I'm going to come, even though there's no noise or grain in the eye, I'm just going to lift the noise slightly to give it that beautiful marble look to it. And that's pretty much what I would do with the eyes. I'm going to press enter. We're going to come back out. Now if we have a look at the image, before, after. So it just really pops all those little elements, all those little adjustments that I've made. It's just really made them pop nicely. And you're really starting to get the deer to stand out. The deer has the most contrast on it, so your eye goes straight to it. Like I mentioned earlier, I've left this area on the left-hand side because of the body posture of the deer. They're facing a 45-degree angle to my left, so I'm leaving a bit of space for them to move into. And I've also then cropped it quite tight because my main subject, the front deer, is staring directly at me. There's a couple of things here. Yes, I'm going to be nitpicking again. If we go back into the image, because I shot at 7.1 and played it quite safe, yes, I blurred out the background beautifully here. But this foreground, this is nitpicking. I just want to try and maybe blur out a little bit of this foreground so that as soon as I look at this image, my eyes go straight to this area and to see this beautiful symmetry between the front spotted deer and the deer behind it. So I'm going to go into the masking tool and I'm going to use the linear gradient and I will drag it from the bottom. Remember, once again, the red areas are the areas that are going to be affected by any adjustment that I make. I'm going to press O for overlay, get rid of that. And then we're going to come down to sharpness and clarity. Sharpness I'm going to bring right down. And what that does is then start to blur it out. I know it doesn't look like much with the naked eye, but remember what we're doing here is that we are just making small adjustments to really enhance our subject and to get the best out of our subject. So what I will do here is also just bring down the clarity slightly. And it just adds a bit of that blur. And now all my focus is on the deer. So it's a fairly quick edit. If you look before and after, it's quite flat. And now it really pops out. Beautiful light. It's got this warmth coloration to it. By sharpening the whole subject, what I've done here, and what's interesting this time of year, is that the deer have a lot of velvet on their horns. So you often find them rubbing their horns up against bushes and trees and logs, trying to get rid of this. So what I've done by sharpening the entire subject is also just enhanced the look of the antlers on the deer and really made that show and pop out as well. So it creates for quite a powerful image. If we have a look at it in full, I'm pretty happy with this edit. And you know, a lot of people make the mistake of over editing images, whereas there is a time and a place for it. Obviously, the more artistic images, like my black and white images, are very, very drastic manipulations to get a specific feel out of an image. But when I'm working with a color image, all I really want to do with it is try and enhance minor bits and pieces that I'm looking at here to get it similar to what I saw out in the field, and just to really get my subject to pop. And what I like about this particular image is that it was a little bit of luck involved. I mean, we pulled up and these two were feeding, and they lifted their head, and it just gave this beautiful symmetry with this one in front standing exactly the same as the one behind it. And obviously they were standing too far apart to have both in focus. And I'm not worried about that at all. I think the one behind that's out of focus does still add to the image because it is aligned with my main subject, being the spotted deer in front that is pin sharp. You can see every detail. You've got that 50-50 light on its face, and it really just makes for a great image. And what I love about this image is not just the symmetry and the way that I edited it, but also the memory that comes behind this photograph. So what I mean by that is thinking back to India and looking at this photograph, I can remember this day extremely well just from looking at this photograph. And I mentioned when I started this episode that you often listen to out for spotted deer and langur monkeys and other general game to alarm call to indicate whether there's a predator in the area. And we moved off from these deer, and shortly after that, these deer started alarm calling. And so we turned around and we went straight back, and these deer, they were part of a bigger herd. There was other individuals around, but they were all alarm calling at a tiger, and we had a brief visual of a tiger. So what I love about photography, and the reason I started photography, and still the reason why I do photography now and teach others, is it's more. There's more to it than just a photograph. It's not just taking a photograph and having a beautiful picture of deer, but taking a photograph and having a memory behind it. And this image means a lot to me from India because it reminds me of driving through the meadows early in the morning and the bamboo forest and listening to the sounds of the forests and the birds and the peacocks, and listening out for those alarm calls. And I find it incredible how a single image like this, even though none of that action is going on, brings back all those memories. So just to get back to it, in terms of an edit, I wouldn't do much more than this. This is the before and after. It really popped out nicely, and like I said earlier, it brings back such incredible memories of my trip to India, and I cannot wait to return there in April next year. So that's it for my Behind the Frame episode this week. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you picked up one or two helpful tips. And if you ever get the chance to head to India, I highly recommend it. It's an incredible safari destination, very different to anything that you would experience in Southern Africa or East Africa. And yeah, I'm really, really happy with this edit. And thank you for watching this video. But for now, I'm going to say goodbye. I hope that you all have a wonderful day, and I'll catch up with you all in the near future.